everyone, and welcome back to building a production-ready web application from scratch. In this video, we're going to discuss defining our project, how to plan a production-ready web application before you build. So, similar to our last video, I feel that creating a written article is the best way to articulate the points I wanted to make for this particular topic. So I'm just going to read through the article, and I think that's going to be the best way to tackle this particular piece of material. Um, if you don't want to watch a video on it and you just want to read it yourself, feel free to just hop over to the article and read it. It's going to be pretty much verbatim what I'm saying here and what's written there. I might have a little go off on a few tangents, but ultimately the content is going to be exactly the same. As we start writing more code, the videos will probably deviate from written articles and even come first. But as I said, for this type of topic, I think writing it down is the best way to explain it. And so I'm just going to go through this topic. I wanted to create a video just to keep the web series alive. They're important topics, and I do kind of want it to be a video series. So let's just go ahead and dive in. Again, if you'd rather just read it yourself, just hop on over to the article. I'll post a link in the description. And so let's dive on in. So defining our project, right? Before you ever write a single line of code, every successful web project is going to start with clarity. It's very tempting to just open up your code editor and start writing code. But without creating a plan, you're very likely to end up with messy code, missing features, waste a lot of time refactoring, and not necessarily even really understand what you are trying to build. Defining that project early on is going to give us direction. It's going to force us to think not just about what we want to build, but we need to build and in what order. This is how real world development teams work, and it ensures that everything that we're delivering is going to be valuable, maintainable, and scalable. And also just give us an idea of what our project is, right? It's way better to get it written down. So why planning before building matters? So planning before a project, before writing any code, is probably the most critical yet overlooked piece in software development, especially for individuals and small teams and freelancers. When you skip it, you may still end up with a working app, but it's often going to lack structure, scalability, and purpose, right? The goal of planning is to create a clear roadmap that's going to define what you're building, why you're building it, and how each piece is going to connect to that larger system. It's really going to help us transform that vague idea into a tangible plan of action and everything that we want to accomplish. The first advantage of this is going to be creating that purpose. It's going to force us to pause and think about what we really want our application to accomplish. Without that clarity, it's easy to get caught up in adding features that feel exciting, but don't necessarily move our project towards its goals. Defining our purpose is going to ensure that every component that we design, every line of code that we write contributes to solving the real problem we're trying to solve. And when your project has well-defined purpose, you can communicate that clearly to users, collaborators, and most importantly, ourselves when we revisit this code later on. Next is going to come our architecture. And for me, this is one of the biggest ones. Once you know what you're building, you can design that technical structure to support it. Planning is going to give us the opportunity to map out all of our data models and schemas, and sometimes even front-end components that's going to allow us to build it in a maintainable way. Instead of patching new features onto a haphazard foundation, you can build this architecture that's modular, testable, and ready to scale first. And that's going to prevent this future tech debt and make our application much easier to evolve as we want to grow it. A clear plan is also going to lead to faster development. So even though it may seem like we're slowing down at first, many developers rush into coding because they equate that with progress, right? They want to get started and have something they can see and do. But the on-plan work almost is always going to lead to rework. By taking that time to think through the features and their relationships up front, we're actually going to minimize the number of surprises that we see later on. You're going to write cleaner code, you're going to identify these dependencies earlier, and we're going to spend far less time debugging problems that we could have been avoided with a solid roadmap. Another key benefit is going to be collaboration. Even though we'll be building this project alone, if we are working with a team, which is much more likely in like real world flows with within corporations and things like that, when a project is well written, documented, and broken down in these features and tasks and the responsibilities, it becomes way easier for others to jump in, understand what's happening, and contribute effectively. Right? Teams are going to be able to assign tasks to different developers or assign tasks to different team members and have everyone work on different features with a clear understanding of how everything fits together and what the requirements are. This good planning is going to make the project much more sustainable. And ultimately, planning is really about foresight, right? We're making decisions while we still have the flexibility to change the direction cheaply. Once this code is written and the dependencies are established, every change is going to become much more time intensive and expensive. By planning now, you give yourself the freedom to experiment on paper rather than in production. The time we invest up front is going to pay itself back later on. So, what is it we need to build, right? It's called an MVP. So, what is an MVP and why it matters? When building a new application, one of the biggest mistakes developers make is trying to do everything at once. You start with a simple idea, maybe it's a do app like our app, a scheduling tool, or a budgeting system, and before you know it, your feature list is going to grow into a full scale platform. There's a login system, profiles, notifications, upload, sharing, dark mode, analytics. The list goes on and on. The excitement of creating something big can easily overshadow the discipline required to get something usable in the hands of real users. And that's where the concept of the minimal viable product is. Right? An MVP is the most basic version of your product that still delivers genuine value to the users. It's not a prototype or a half finished demo, it's a fully functional product that solves a core problem that your app is meant to address, right? So it's a finished product, the first version. The minimum part doesn't mean cutting corners or releasing something broken or half baked, right? It means stripping away everything that isn't essential to validating your idea. The viable part means it actually works, right? It performs the core tasks reliably and provides a meaningful experience. The purpose of an MVP is to prove that your idea is worth pursuing before investing more time and resources in all those nice to have features, right? Building an MVP forces us to focus on what matters most, solving the user's primary problem. For example, if your goal is to help people stay organized, your MVP needs advanced task sharing or color coded priorities, right? It needs the ability to create, view, and manage those tasks, nothing more. By launching with just essentials, you can validate that concept, get feedback, and make improvements based on real usage instead of assumptions. I mean, and I cannot hit that home enough, right? Everyone thinks they know what's valuable. No one's going to give you better feedback than the users actually using the application. This approach is going to save you months of unnecessary development time and prevents you from over engineering a product that no one ends up using. Another key benefit of defining your MVP is momentum. Finishing a complete functional version of your app, even a small one, is going to build confidence, motivation, right? It allows you to experience that full life cycle of product development. And each of these steps is going to teach us a lesson that informs every other feature we build afterwards. When you work on too many features at once, it's easy to get lost in the middle of the process and lose sight of your goal. This MVP gives us a finish line to reach, and that finish line creates progress that we can tangibly see. From a technical standpoint, the MVP mindset also helps us ensure scalability and maintainability. By focusing on a new core feature first, you can test your architecture under real conditions and refine that backend design before it becomes too complex to change. You'll identify performance bottlenecks, clarify these API contracts, validate your database. In short, you're going to learn faster and you're going to build smarter. Again, can't hit that home enough. And then perhaps the most valuable reason to build that MVP is feedback. No matter how experienced you are, you're never going to perfectly predict how users are going to interact with your app. People find creative ways to use software, often in ways that you didn't anticipate. Releasing this MVP early is going to allow us to get insight into that real behavior, which is going to help you make informed decisions about what to build next instead of guessing. You can evolve that app based off that evidence. So, in essence, the MVP isn't just a milestone, And I would say it's not even just an option, right? It's a mindset. Keeps your project lean, focused, and adaptable. It's by doing the most with the least, validating your idea quickly, and then iterating intelligently. As you build the rest of this course, think about each step as part of this MVP journey, right? And we're going to create this MVP for ours, right? Every module, component, and feature we add will serve a purpose, not just because it's flashy, because it makes a product more valuable to the people who use it. So, how do we break down this project into features, right? How do we create this MVP? So, once we understand the purpose of our project and have a clear vision for MVP, the next step is going to be to translate that vision into a specific actionable features. So, this is where idea starts to take place into practical terms. It's no longer a to do app or a web platform, it's a structured list of capabilities that define what your application can actually do. Breaking down a project into features is both an art and a discipline, and no one is exactly the same. The process is going to begin with understanding what your core objective is, like the real problem you're trying to solve. Every app exists to make something easier, faster, or more enjoyable for users. If you start with a vague or overly broad idea, like I want to help people manage their time, you're quickly going to find you're going to see swimming in endless possibilities. But if you define a clear purpose, I want to help users organize tasks into one place and track their progress, that development path becomes much more achievable. The next step is to imagine your user's experience from start to finish. Ask yourself, what does a person need to be able to do to accomplish the goal of my application? This question is going to help us identify our core user actions, the essential things that the user must be able to do to perform for your app to have a value. For a to do app, that might include creating tasks, organizing them into lists, marking them as complete. These actions form the foundation of your product. Right? If a user can't perform then the application fails to fulfill its purpose, and no matter how beautiful or complex the rest of the system is, it's not going to be a success. Once you've defined those core actions, you can identify supporting features, the elements that are going to make those actions possible. For example, to let users manage tasks, you're going to need authentication, so each person's data remains private. You need persistent storage to save their tasks in the list between sessions. You might need image uploads if the user want to attach screenshots or reference photos. Supporting features are then the building blocks that allow your core features to exist. At this stage, it's common to get carried away with possibilities. You might think about adding push notifications, reminder, team sharing, integration with third party systems. These are great ideas, but they belong in later phases. And this is where the prioritization becomes critical. Not every feature is essential for your MVP, and not every feature should be built right away. Your goal here is to identify the minimum set of features that make your app usable and valuable. Everything else can wait until after you've validated that core experience. A practical way to approach this is to categorize them into three tiers: core features, which are absolutely required for the application to function; supporting features enhance users' ability but can be built after launch; and then feature enhancements, optional features that are going to add polish or complexity later. For instance, in a to do app, a core feature would be creating and managing tasks. A supporting feature is going to be adding due dates or file uploads that might be supporting features. Integrations with other platforms would then be a feature enhancement. By structuring your features this way, you prevent scope creep and keep your development organized. You also make it easier to plan your work in stages, which aligns perfectly how we'll define epics and tasks for this course. Breaking down a project into features is like creating a map before a road trip. Without it, you might still reach your destination, but it's going to take you longer, cost more, and have a lot more unnecessary detours. Okay, so defining the MVP for our project. So now we've covered kind of those core concepts. Let's actually start digging into defining it for our core project, our to-do list. So now that we've talked about what this MVP is, right? It's time to put those ideas into action. In this section, we're going to define the actual product we'll be building, a full stack production grade to do application, and outline the features that will make up our minimum viable product. The purpose of this project isn't just to build a to-do list. It's to demonstrate how to architect and develop a complete web application from the ground up. Using real-world technologies and best practices, we're going to approach this project the same way a professional software team would, with a clear definition of goals, features, and scope before we write any code. So when you think about a to-do app, it might sound simple at first. You add tasks, mark them complete, and move on. But the moment you want to make the app production ready, things become much more interesting, right? You got to consider authentication, storage, image management, scalability, and the user interface that feels polished. These details are what turn coding exercises into a real product, and they're exactly what we're going to be tackling here. So let's start by defining our core goals for MVP. So the main objective of our MVP is to create a fully functional cloud connected to-do application that users can sign into, manage their own data, and interact through with a clean modern interface. It should feel like a real application, something you could deploy publicly and then continue to build upon. Right? So that's essentially the mission statement of our application. So what is it going to take to do that? First is going to be secure user authentication. Users should be able to register, sign in, and manage their own tasks. All authentication is going to be handled by our own backend using email and password with JSON web tokens for secure sessions. Next is going to be task and list management. Users need to be able to create and organize tasks into lists. Each task should support adding a name, description, and completion state. All user data, persistent data storage. All user data, including tasks, lists, and profile details, should be stored in a database so that it's saved between sessions and accessible across all devices. Profile management. Each user should be able to upload profile picture, which will be stored in AWS S3, and we'll discuss some of this stuff later. But this is going to give us a real world example of handling file uploads, managing secure storage without adding any unnecessary complex to the task itself. Responsive user interface with dark mode. So this is one I was actually kind of torn from. But the front end should be modern, responsive, and easy to navigate. We're actually going to implement both a light and a dark theme from the start because it's going to be easier for us to do that now rather than later. But this is exactly one of those things that you could argue that this isn't a core feature. I've built light and dark modes before, so I, in my experience, find it's much easier to do when the project is first being built than later on. So I chose to include it. But you could easily remove this as a requirement if you wanted to. And then reliable API later. The backend is going to expose a set of RESTful APIs built with Nest.js that's going to handle authentication, task management, profile management, image uploads, and these APIs are going to connect seamlessly with a MongoDB for persistent data storage. Right, so you can see here, it's a clearly defined set of things that I want to be able to happen with our application. It's not broken down into epics and tasks yet. We'll get to that in a video pretty soon. But through reading this, everyone should be able to really understand exactly what you plan on accomplishing with your application, and you can really define, this is what I'm trying to do. So now our MVP feature breakdown. So each of the following features is going to correspond directly to one of those MVP goals that we have above, and it's going to become its own epic and a larger body of work made up of smaller actionable tasks. So user authentication. We'll create a registration and login flow that allows users to securely access their accounts. Passwords will be hashed and stored safely. Once user signs in, they'll receive a JSON web token that authenticates them across all API calls, assuring that each user's data remains private and isolated. To-do lists. Lists will act as containers for related tasks, for example, work, personal, or groceries. Users should be able to create new lists, rename them, and delete them when they're no longer needed. This helps users organize their life in a structured way. Tasks. Tasks are going to be the heart of the application. Each task will have a title, an optional description, a completion state. Users should be able to create, edit, mark complete, and delete tasks. This feature will also handle how tasks are stored in the database and displayed on the front end. Profile management. Every user will have a profile section where they can update their display name and upload a profile picture. This feature will demonstrate how to securely handle file uploads using AWS 3, re-signed URLs, ensuring files are stored efficiently and safely in the cloud. Responsive dashboard with dark mode. We'll build a clean and modern dashboard in Angular that connects our backend API. The dashboard will display the user's lists and tasks handle interactions like adding or deleting items, and include a dark mode option to personalize the user experience. By designing with theming in mind from the beginning, will make our UI more scalable and consistent. And then lastly, a backend API layer. The backend will be built with Nest.js, will manage all core logic, from authenticating users to handling the CRUD operations for tasks and lists. It's going to connect to a MongoDB for persistent data storage, manage our environment variables securely, and include the endpoints for profile management and image uploads. Makes sense? So beyond the MVP, once the MVP is completed and deployed, we will have a strong foundation to then build upon. From there, we can explore more advanced features that we can then enhance collaboration, automation, and personalization. Right? I'm not going to go into these too deeply, but you could add team collaboration, filtering, advanced analytics, AI stuff. The list can go on and on. Right? But by focusing first on this MVP, we're going to ensure that our core product is stable, scalable, and maintainable. And then as we expand in later phases, we can then introduce those enhancements incrementally without disrupting that foundation that we've built. So that's all I have for today. I hope it was helpful. I know we're eager to start coding, but we got a couple more topics we got to cover before we really dive into actually creating the application. But I hope this really clarified the importance of an MVP in defining the project, as well as very well outlined what it is we're going to be building, right? And again, soon we're going to break these down in episodes and tasks, and that's where we're going to get into those really fine details, and the whole project is going to start taking shape. But by looking at this, you can see the value of creating this MVP feature breakdown, because you should be able to read this and immediately know what it is we're going to be building and doing, right? Getting the full scope of the project. So, again, hope this was helpful. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next video.